Quarterback is the most important position in football, and sometimes it can also be the most chaotic. After all, every team that doesn't have one is desperate for one, and that can lead to some rather entertaining signal caller showdowns, both in training camp and throughout the season itself. Whether it's a seasoned pro landing in a new city or one of the new kids on the block trying to lock down one of those life-changing starting quarterback contracts, it seems like every year there's some bizarre situation that takes place. The NFL has never been short on drama under center. So, without further ado, let us dive into the 10 craziest quarterback situations in NFL history. '18 Philadelphia Eagles. There was a time that Nick Foles walked on water in Philly. Unfortunately, it happened to coincide with the fever dream of a period during which Carson Wentz was supposed to be the franchise quarterback. The Eagles had two legit options at quarterback, and a Super Bowl ring to show for it. And yet somehow, when all was said and done, nobody was happy. This wasn't just a quarterback controversy, it was a full-blown identity crisis for a team that did the unthinkable, knocking off Brady and Belichick with a backup quarterback. Wentz was the number 2 overall pick, the chosen one, the guy who had the Eagles sitting at 11-2 before shredding his knee in LA. A few more games, and he might have locked up the MVP. But then came Foles, who stepped in, caught fire, and delivered the city its first Super Bowl title, against Tom Brady no less. One guy had the Super Bowl MVP, the other nearly took home regular season MVP honors before getting hurt. After that Super Bowl, the city of brotherly love was split down the middle. And instead of choosing between them, the Eagles chose chaos by keeping both, shattering Wentz's confidence and putting Foles in an unwinnable situation. Wentz struggled, and Foles couldn't really rise to the level that was needed to fully usurp Wentz. And ultimately, neither stuck. This easily has to go down as one of the weirdest quarterback situations of all time, as it met its conclusion with a statue, a trade, and an endless loop of what-ifs. 2017 New York Giants. Eli Manning was on the back nine of his career. Everyone could see it. But benching a 2-time Super Bowl MVP mid-season for pre-Seahawks Geno Smith was something that nobody expected. Yeah, sure, the Giants were struggling, but this was not a changing of the guard. This was Ben McAdoo lighting the building on fire with a gas can and a shrug, seemingly for no real reason. At least no other than a desperate attempt at saving his job. But man, that came at a cost. Eli's streak of 210 consecutive starts, which came to an end not in dramatic fashion, but in a meaningless game during a season that the Giants were already belly up in. It felt like someone pulling the curtain on a Broadway show before the finish. A move so baffling, ownership stepped in, reversed it, and then fired McAdoo anyway. But the damage was already done. The one-week quarterback experiment destroyed McAdoo's credibility and kicked off a multi-year rebuild that's still not quite done in New York. In fact, far from it if we're being honest. 2015 Cleveland Browns. Johnny Football's pro career was as dysfunctional as his college days were electric. Every year with Johnny Manziel felt like a new headline. Unfortunately, most came off the field. But 2015 was the season when chaos finally broke containment. Behind the scenes, it was a complete mess. Manziel had just finished a stint in rehab that spring. He reportedly missed tons of team meetings, showed up on injury reports under suspicious circumstances, ticked off veterans left, right, and center, and was regularly caught partying on social media while the team floundered. The situation was so bad that the team finished 3-13. The front office cleaned house, and ultimately, Manziel played his last NFL game. 2012 New York Jets. By 2012, the Sanchez era was already on life support. But what the Jets did that year wasn't just odd, it was, well, outright self-sabotage disguised as strategy. Mark Sanchez had taken the Jets to 2 AFC title games in his first 2 seasons. Sure, he wasn't elite, but man, he was serviceable. And the team at least had an identity. Defense first, run the ball, and if Mark could make 1 or 2 big throws, man, they could beat anyone. Then came the unthinkable pivot. They brought in Tim Tebow, and, well, neither guy thrived. Tebow was barely used, and when he was, it disrupted whatever rhythm Sanchez had. I mean, how else do you explain the now infamous butt fumble play? Oh well, in any case, that locker room was split. The media circus hit peak volume, and nobody knew who was actually leading the locker room. The results were predictable to everyone except the Jets front office. New York finished 6-10, Sanchez threw 18 interceptions, Tebow threw 8 total passes all year, and the offense looked like it had been designed by a committee of 13-year-old Madden players. Yeah, needless to say, the mastermind behind the idea, general manager Mike Tannenbaum, was unceremoniously fired at the end of the season. 2016 San Francisco 49ers. The 2016 49ers season was so chaotic, it is hard to even say it was about quarterback competition. On one hand, you had Blaine Gabbert, once a top 10 draft pick, now clinging to his third chance, like a guy who knew the clock was ticking. On the other, well, you had Colin Kaepernick, a former Super Bowl starter whose career arc was already zigzagging before he became the most talked about athlete in the country for reasons far bigger than football. Then you had Chip Kelly into the mix, fresh off a turbulent run in Philly that ended with him being chased out of town by his players. This was not just a bad season. Oh no, this was a season where no one, from front office to field, seemed to know what they were doing or why. And by the year's end, the team was 2-14. Chip Kelly was out. So was GM Trent Baalke. Cap opted out of his contract, Gabbert moved on, and the 49ers hit the reset button again. 2025 Cleveland Browns. Even by Brown standards, 2025 is shaping up to be an absolute disaster under center. In fact, there's reason to believe that this one could well be their masterpiece. 4 quarterbacks, 1 depth chart, 0 certainty, and Deshaun Watson isn't even factored into the equation. It all started with his controversial acquisition, then the injuries came, culminating in Watson tearing his Achilles in 2024, then, unbelievably, tore it yet again during rehab. So that left the Browns scrambling. So what did they do? Well, they went wide net, trying to ensure that they had someone competent under center. Joe Flacco was brought into the fold as the veteran presence, Kenny Pickett was traded for as a flyer, and then they used the 2025 draft to add both Shedeur Sanders and Dylan Gabriel, 2 high-profile draft prospects with questionable professional profiles. You'd be forgiven for assuming someone, heck, maybe 2, would be cut. But no, the Browns might just carry all 4 until week 1. Because, of course they would. They're the Browns. Well, reports suggest Pickett is trending towards starting week 1, but Flacco has fans in the building. And Sanders and Gabriel? Well, they're both considered part of the future. At least, the near future. Jeez, only in Cleveland could your franchise quarterback vanish, 4 other brand-name guys get piled into the building, and the whole thing be treated like business as usual. 2012 Denver Broncos. Tim Tebow wasn't a great quarterback, but he was a phenomenon. He couldn't hit a routine slant route, but somehow he kept winning. Miracle after miracle. Fourth quarter magic hit its peak with the dramatic playoff win over the Steelers in overtime. He had that mile-high crowd chanting his name like he was the second coming of Elway. And then he was gone. Because when Peyton Manning hits the market, you don't think, you act. The Broncos signed Manning, thanked Tebow for the memories, and traded him to the Jets in what felt like the cleanest breakup in sports history. Except it wasn't. Half the fan base felt like they'd lost their savior. The other half couldn't believe that they ever doubted the move. Of course, history came to prove that Denver made the right decision in spades. But still, the abruptness of it, the cold pivot from a holy man to a Hall of Famer, was very jarring. Tebow's rise and fall was unlike anything the league has ever seen. It was a quarterback situation that defied logic, stats, and game tape. And then, poof, just vanished just as fast as it arrived. 2008 Green Bay Packers. I guess this one technically spanned from 05 to 08, but with Rodgers waiting in the wings behind Favre, this led to one of the most awkward quarterback transitions in history. So yeah, as we mentioned, this one technically started in 2005, but it really hit its fever pitch in 2008, the year that Green Bay became a football soap opera. Aaron Rodgers had been waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting behind Brett Favre, who kept flirting with retirement every single offseason. Favre retired, then unretired, and at first, Packers fans were divided. But you know, by the time he was traded to the Jets, many were just ready for a chance. That came in 2008 when Favre once again announced that he was done. The Packers stated that Rodgers was the guy, and everyone believed that the torch had finally been passed. You know, until it wasn't. Favre unretired again, and he wanted his job back. The Packers, to their credit, stood firm. They said the future was Rodgers, and that was that. You know, until they traded Favre to the Jets, igniting a fan-based civil war that split families and sold thousands of thanks for the memories jerseys. Good news, the Packers were right. Rodgers would go on to win multiple MVPs and deliver another Lombardi. But for a few months in 2008, the NFL's most storied franchise looked like it was being run by a hillbilly gunslinger who couldn't make up his mind on how he wanted to spend his falls. 2007 Atlanta Falcons. There are quarterback controversies, And then there are quarterback crises. And that is exactly what the Atlanta Falcons experienced in 2007. In 2007, the Falcons went from having one of the league's most electrifying players to absolutely no plan at all, almost overnight. Michael Vick wasn't just the face of the Falcons, he was the franchise, a unique era-defining talent who sold jerseys and put butts in seats. Then came the dogfighting scandal. By the time training camp opened, Vick was indicted. His season was over and his career in jeopardy. And at the very end, well, the Falcons were left scrambling. They tried to hold it together with Joey Harrington, Byron Leftwich, and even Chris Redman. Yeah, Chris Redman. But of course, the team finished 4-12, with the icing on the cake being head coach Bobby Petrino bailing out before the season even ended, leaving a laminated goodbye letter in the locker room like a high school teacher on the last day of school. It wasn't just a quarterback problem. Oh no, it was a full systems collapse. And it would take a long time and a guy named Matt Ryan to rebuild what Vick's absence had broken. 2022 Cleveland Browns. In 2022, Cleveland didn't just sign Deshaun Watson. Oh no, they backed up the Brinks truck and handed him the first fully guaranteed $230 million deal in NFL history. You know, despite the fiery circus surrounding him. At the time, Watson was facing 24 civil lawsuits, hadn't played in over a year, and had serious questions hanging over both his off-field future and locker room fit. The move sent shockwaves throughout the league. Coaches, players, fans, media, everyone had something to say. Some were outraged, others were confused, and a lot were just stunned. It wasn't just a bold move. It was a bet that Watson would return to MVP form and deliver a Super Bowl in exchange for the controversy. But here's the thing, he didn't. Not even close. Watson was a shell of his former self. When he did play, the Browns' offense looked disjointed. When he didn't, the team actually played better with backups like Jacoby Brissett and eventually Joe Flacco. And now, he's not even a lock to play in 2025 after tearing his Achilles twice, once in a game and again during rehab. So what did Cleveland get out of the biggest gamble in franchise history? Well, PR damage, locker room tension, cap complications, and one of the worst ROI contracts in modern sports. And more so, what does it say about the Browns that they've appeared on this list 3 times? Jeez, poor Cleveland fans can't catch a break. But hey, which quarterback situation do you think was the craziest in NFL history? Was there anyone that we may have missed? What do you think we got right here? What do you think we got wrong? Let us know in the comment section below. If you like this video and learned a thing or two, then clicking the like button helps us out a ton. And you know, we really appreciate it. If this is your first time coming around to TPS though, then subscribing is a great idea, because we put out videos like this every single day. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.